Welcome to Speaking from Experience. My name is Rohan, and this is the weekly podcast where I talk about my experiences working in the digital marketing space over the last 10 years, and more importantly, over the last 1 year working at Google. I will talk about the ups and downs throughout my career, about love, relationships, family, money, and a whole lot more. So I really hope you enjoy the episodes you're going to hear. I have poured my heart and soul into them. If you do like the content, please share and subscribe to the podcast. Today, we're going to talk about an experience that is very close to my heart and which will hopefully give you an insight on my first few months at Google. That's right. Today we're going to talk about how you can maximize the return on your investment in your first few months at a new job. And we will learn about some of my experiences at my dream job at the Big G. As always, I'll begin my podcast with a bit of a story. So I still remember the first day when I walked into Google, the bright lights, the graffiti on the wall, and the playful nature of the office was everything that I dreamed about. And I was just like a kid in a candy store. I wanted to touch everything. I wanted to play with the VR headset, which was there in the corner as soon as you go into the office. I wanted to drink the fancy water. I wanted to sit on the plush leather couch, and more than anything, I wanted to get a photo in front of the Big G logo and post it on my social media and shout out to the world saying, fuck yeah, I've made it in life. But as soon as I walked in, the reality set in as well. I had done all this hard work to actually get to Google, but that was my first day. And the journey had just begun. And that's when I felt a chill run down my spine. And I realized that I was fully committed to this. This is what my life was going to be. And this was probably going to be one of the most important and the best experiences of my career. So I took it head on. Working at any company, let alone working at your dream job, can be very daunting. So this time when I started at Google, and since it was my dream job, I wanted to make sure that I made the most out of the first few months. I did stuff that I'd never done before. I went prepared for meetings. I went to every meeting out there, and I'll talk about a lot more things that I did in today's episode. So let's start. The first experience that I'm going to share with you guys, and the first advice that I'll give you, is to be humble and be grateful for whatever you have achieved. I'm sure you worked your butt off to get to whatever your dream position is. And so did I. When I started at Google, my first day, I realized that I was embarking on something wonderful and something that would change my career forever. So that day, I decided that I will not let that success get to my head, because I had seen and heard about many people who had achieved this amazing position and just became very arrogant and let the success get to them, which eventually also resulted in their career going down the drain. I definitely didn't want to give this vibe out to people, so I made a conscious effort to not be arrogant about what I had achieved, because millions of other people around the world had achieved the same thing. So I kept reminding myself that every day. But I was also grateful for the opportunity that I was given, for the ability to even interview for a company this big. And that was one of the major reasons for me to start this podcast. It was because I've been given this opportunity and this pedestal to be at Google. It's obviously an honor for me to work for such a big company. I wanted to share all of my experiences so that it's much easier for people to actually dream and get into a company like Google. It's not a big deal. It's not as hard as people make it out to be. So I definitely hope that you learn something from all my experiences. As I'd mentioned in my introduction, one of the first things that I incorporated into my behavior was to be grateful and to be able to give back to the community. So what I started to do was write about my experiences on Medium. I also started to write about my experiences on LinkedIn. I was also very vocal within Google in my first few months to help people who wanted to transition into my role or an open role on my team from different parts of Google, so that I could help them with all of the traumatic and wonderful interview experiences that I had. And that definitely helped me, find my place in the company. I knew that I was doing the right thing and I was sharing all my experiences. I had worked really hard to get to Google, and when I actually started at Google, I was a nervous wreck. I wanted to just keep my head down, not talk to people, and be like the new kid in school who's always awkward and is still trying to fit into a group. And sharing my experiences and helping others within the organization actually helped me come out of my shell and enjoy my job a whole lot more and wake up every morning with a new sense of passion and excitement. Tip 2 is something that's heavily ingrained into the DNA of Google. And I realized that this was common across the board, no matter which office I went to, no matter which team I work with. One thing that I realized very quickly was that people at Google never stressed about deadlines. And this was very, very different from any other job that I've worked for. So my background is in digital marketing, and I have worked at marketing agencies all my life. And for anyone who's worked at a marketing agency, they will realize a deadline is like Jesus's words. It has to be followed and you have to meet the deadline, otherwise the client will flip their shit. Whereas when I started at Google, things were completely different. No matter how urgent or how solid the deadline was, nobody at Google actually stressed out about it. And that just made us work so much harder, because you knew that there was no one behind you to clean up your shit, and you had to focus and finish your work on that deadline. And there was no point of making a big hue and cry about it. There was no point of complaining to your boss. There was always help available when you needed it to help you meet the deadline, but nobody ever stressed out. In the last 10 years of working in digital marketing, one thing I've realized, no matter how strict the deadline is, it can always be moved. So one advice I will give you right now is that if you can't meet a deadline, be frank with your client and be frank with your supervisor or whoever is responsible for the deadline, and just say you can't meet it, because it's okay to not meet deadlines and be honest about it, rather than try to meet them and then disappoint people. I still remember my first week, I was put into a major client pitch and I had to come up with a presentation in 2 days. And this, in any other organization, would have been stressful. But the fact that this was my first week at Google made it even more stressful. I was a train wreck. And that's when I shared my nervousness with the person who I was working on the pitch with. And he gave me some really simple tips. He told me, that we were the experts and that the client trusted us in what we were going to present. So there was no need to be nervous. It was just two people in one room having a conversation about how to get one person from A to B. It was nothing more, nothing less. Forget about the money, forget about the revenue attached to that presentation. Just remember to get your point across and to be as clear as possible with the client. It's just about having that one-on-one conversation and about building that rapport with the client, which mattered more than stressing out about a deadline or some stupid numbers on a presentation. Another thing that my first few months at Google taught me was the power of feedback. I can't tell you how much getting feedback from my peers and my seniors helped me grow in my role in the first few months. I always took 5 or 10 minutes after meetings to ask the person who I was with in that meeting to give me one-on-one feedback on what I could improve, whether there was anything that they would have done differently, and whether I landed the point I was trying to make with the client. Tip 3, or advice 3, let's just call it an advice, not a tip, would be to always be open to learning something new. In your first few months at any job, no matter how big or small it is, you should be like a sponge. You should be going to every meeting out there. You should be listening to anyone and everyone who's willing to talk to you. And you should be writing down everything. That's something that I started doing at my job at Google. I never used to take notes, but I realized how important it was to start writing down things because it helped me focus my thoughts and actually remember the stuff that was thrown at me for the first few months. I used to hate taking notes. So what I did was that I used this app called Otter. And there's plenty of apps out there that would transcribe whatever someone is saying into written text. I also asked people for permission on whether I could voice record the meetings. And to my surprise, 99% of the times they were more than happy for me to record the meetings as I was new. And when it came to client meetings, they were even more happy for me to record the meetings because that showed them that I actually wanted to invest some time in learning about the business. I made some really good friends on my team in my first few months at Google, and one of those friends actually worked on the data science team. I was always intrigued by data science. I have to do a lot of analysis as a part of my job, and which is why I always thought that data science would be the next gradual step for me in my career. So I went and talked to one of the data scientists on my team who was also working on a common client, and I just asked him whether I could shadow him. To my surprise, he was very, very nice and took me under his wings. He got me involved in pretty much every project that we did for that client, and that gave me so much clarity on whether I actually wanted to work in data science in the future. He also gave me some resources that I could look up in my free time for courses. And he also shared tons of articles with me that gave me more information about the field and helped me nail down whether that was the right next step, be it after 6 months or after 2 or 3 years. I also attended a total of 594 meetings in my first 3 months at Google. I know that number is staggering, but when you're a part of a company as big as Google, you get copied on pretty much every freaking email out there, and you get invites to every event out there. One thing that I had decided going into Google was that I will attend every meeting humanly possible in my first 3 months to get as much information about the company, as much information about the teams that I was working with. So that's what I did. I followed through on my word, and 594 meetings later, I realized that I had a better grasp over who I needed to reach out for help, who I was working with, what the roles around me meant, what all the jargons within Google meant, and at the end of the day, it helped me do my job in a better way because I knew exactly what the next step was when I encountered an issue. The last one, and which I'm pretty much trying to do with this podcast, would be to give back to the community and to not be afraid to speak up. So when I started at Google, I definitely wanted to share my experience with people, and I wanted to tell them proudly about all of the work that I had done to get to Google, whether it was my previous work experiences, whether it was dealing with client conflicts, or whether it was just coming up with a better way of project management. I wanted to tell everyone and contribute to every meeting that I went to, all 594 of them. So my biggest tip would be to share your experience, because you're allowed to share your experiences as a newcomer, and to ask out of the box questions, or as some people may say, stupid questions, especially to clients, because when you're new on the account or when you're new at a job, it's okay to ask those so-called dumb questions, and you'd rather ask them and get it out of the way instead of waiting 6 or 8 months and then asking them the questions when you encounter an issue. To my surprise, people were more than willing to answer those questions, and they were actually quite happy because, as I mentioned earlier, that actually shows that you give a shit about your job and you give a shit about the client. One such time was when my manager wanted a better way of project managing our teams offsite, and she basically volunteered me to help her improve the process. So I was following Agile in my previous company, and I sort of took those learnings from Agile as a way of project management and told her about the awesome things that Agile could solve for her, about what a Kanban board was, what a sprint was, and how we could actually incorporate that into our team's offsite and make it a lot more efficient to get the results that she was wanting to get out of that offsite. So that helped me not only build trust with my manager, but that also helped me build trust with my team and to show them that I was keen to share my knowledge, and I was keen to not only teach them but also learn from their feedback on what I was trying to show them. And they were all very respectful and very receptive to the idea. So if you have a great idea, and if you're in your first few months in the job, don't be afraid to speak up. Everyone will respect that and love you for it. The last thing I did was to get involved with all of the social committees out there, whether it was organizing offsites or organizing a hackathon or learning how to make coffee from a barista, or helping someone with their small business or with their blog. I did pretty much everything that I could to make friends, to get myself out there, and to absorb information in my first few months. I just loved every bit of it. And while I was very exhausted by the end of a few days because of all of the extra commitments, it definitely helped me make friends, and it helped me know my coworkers in a more personal way. It's okay if you don't connect with everyone, but I'm sure you'll find someone out there who will be more than just a co-worker in the long. So don't be afraid in your first 3 months. I know it can be daunting when you start a new job, but just be aware that everyone around you has gone through that same experience and will be more than happy to help you through that process, and will be more than accommodating if you mess up. It's not a big deal. You're not saving lives unless you are saving lives and doing research on cancer or COVID. I really appreciate your work, but if you're not saving lives, don't take it very seriously and enjoy your first few months at your new role, and good luck for the future. All right, experience seekers, that was it for today's episode. If you liked the content for today, please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. And more importantly, spread the word, because the more number of people who listen to the podcast, the more motivated I am to smash out this amazing content.